The second way is to get teachers from inform. That is, the second is to have a meeting of the teachers, inform all the teachers that this is a new rule, this is the new setup. So when you go to the classroom, inform the students. So second is to distribute the information through teachers. The third is to put up the information on the notice board. Get some registrar of the college, ask the registrar to type a notice and put up the notice on the notice board. So I can think of at least three ways of communicating a new rule or new policy to the students of the college. Now, which one of these three, which of the three methods is more effective, most effective? So a curious student wants to find out which of these three possible methods is the most effective. So the question is clear. Now we can think of what are different ways in which the student can find answer to this question. So a simple example of a research problem at even undergraduate level. Very often people say that the undergraduate students are not ready for research. So will they be able to carry out research? So my claim is that the research required at the undergraduate level is not very high level research. The purpose of this activity is to make the students aware of the research methodology, not the conclusions, not the importance of the topic, but how can they do it? How should they do it? So in order to understand research methodology, this is one of the examples. Think of this situation. Then you can even think of this concretely. The principal gets a circular from the university, and the university informs the principal that from next academic year onwards, the following is going to be the policy for the students or for some rules. Now the principal has to convey this information to the students, and the principal thinks of three possibilities, three possible ways of doing it. What is the first? The first is very simple, centralized approach. What is that approach? The principal uses the public address system and announce it to the college. So the entire college campus can hear it. It is audible. Everybody can hear it. That is one way. That is once and for all. That principal makes an announcement. Second, some teachers say that all the students may not be equally attentive, all the classes may not be equally, or the voice may not be equally, uh, audible. So whatever principals announces may not be equally audible in all the classes. So some students may not receive or may not pay enough attention, and so on. So for different reasons, some teachers may say that okay, that one single announcement may not work properly. So what to do? So principal takes a meeting of all the teachers, says, okay, this is the announcement. When you go to the classroom, make the announcement to the classroom. So second approach is class level announcements. So instead of one college level announcement, now we have class level announcement. For every class, there is an announcement. So obviously, what does it mean? More resources, because every teacher has to inform the students in the classroom. So it will collectively take more time. It will collectively involve more people, but it is also a possibility. A third possibility is the principal asks some say typist in the office to type a notice and put it up on the notice board. Officially, the students have been informed because students are expected or required to read the notice board at least once in a day. So principal says, okay, my work is over. I have got this notice typed. It is on the notice board. Now students should read it and behave accordingly, change their practice accordingly. So these are the three ways in which this information can be conveyed to the students. Now, a curious student wants to find out which of these three possible methods is the most effective method. Now, I have to first define what is meant by most effective method, because so one person may define the most effective method as maximum number of students having received the information. So in reaching the students, maximum number of students is the achievement or success of this activity. So one criterion can be maximum number of students have received the information. Second criterion can be, okay, many students may have heard it, they may ignore it. So second possibility is we say, okay, when there is a change in the behavior of the students, we find how many students have changed their behavior. So instead of only receiving the information, if they change their behavior, then we say that this new notice, new policy has been more effective. So second answer can be more people following the new standard, new norms. So how should the student proceed to find the answer to this question? So again, there are many possibilities. The first, which may not be the simplest, is to ask many students what they have understood from the announcement. So first, as I said, was only abstract. I did not have any methodology. I only assumed that more students have understood or not so many students have understood. Now I can go to the students and I can go on asking them, did you understand the announcement? Yes. Would you like to follow the new policy? Yes. So count. And I can estimate the number of students who are likely to obey the new rules. Now it is not the simplest because I have to ask every student. This will require selecting, or I can only select a sample of students and ask them the question, not all of them, because my conjecture is after by random sampling, I may select a sample and whatever response I get on the sample represents the average response of the class. So I believe in simple random sampling, so I can reduce my sample size, but still I have to use some sample size, source reasonable number. So the way is to ask many students what they have understood from the announcement or circular or the notice. Now this will require selecting a few students and asking them to record their responses because I want the data to be collected. So I record the responses. Maybe I give a spreadsheet and ask them to do a tick mark, click on something or make some entries. So this will have to be repeated for every type of action of the college. So every time the college has some action, I may repeat this activity. So what is activity? First, select a few students, then give a questionnaire to the students and ask them to tick mark on their choices, and then collect this in data, feed it to the computer, and try to analyze the data using a computer in order to answer the question. The second possibility is to observe the change in the behavior of the students. So instead of going and asking them, I can only observe. I may have to spend some more time, but I can actually directly observe the behavior and change in the behavior of students as a measure of the effectiveness of the communication. So now what is my conjecture? There have been three different ways of communication. Now when I observe, what do I observe? I observe the behavior as the result of the change of in policy. So what is my analysis now? I will first analyze the behavior. I have now three groups. So which students show more change in the behavior than the other two groups? Then I will say, okay, it means that that mode of communication is more effective or most effective. So observe the change in the behavior of the student as a measure of effectiveness of the way of communication. So I may say, okay, the way in which communication was made is reflected in the way in which the students respond. That is, change in the behavior is the response of the student. And then there is a proportion, sense of proportion. So the more effective is my communication, more students are should or are expected to change their behavior. and therefore in some sense there is a one-to-one correspondence, and I now have the methodology. So our interest now is not in the actual methodology but in the philosophy, in the logic behind it. So this method, the second method, requires more time because the effect of the decision will be visible only after a certain amount of time. So if I want to depend on the actual behavior of the students rather than their responses to my questions, I may have to wait for longer time. And after a long time, sufficiently long time, I will be I will be able to ascertain whether the students are following the new rules or not following the new rules. And therefore, the more reliable way is also more time taking. This time taking way is not so reliable. Now we understand the meaning of optimality. What we can say, given the time, I can optimize the content, or even given the content, I can optimize the time. But I cannot optimize both of them simultaneously. But in reality, our interest is usually try to communicate most effectively, try to communicate fast, but try to communicate in a short time. So better communication in a short time. So that is a ideal situation. So we have to find out what is the best way of communication to achieve the goal. So these are the two ways. The third possible way is to request teachers to observe and record if they find any effect of the new policy or rules on the behavior of the students. So go to the classroom level, ask every teacher to observe the behavior of their students and record and report. Now this will not take a long time, but can be questionable because the potential teachers have their potential influences on the opinions about the new rules. So if some teachers don't like the new rules, their reporting may not be very unbiased, their reporting may not be very honest, may not be very clear. So if we depend on teachers to report the change in the behavior of the students, then the teacher's own opinions about the new policy or new rules may affect their observation. And therefore, even if this is a very quick method, it is not very reliable method. So in research, you have to always keep in mind quality versus quantity. Very high quantity of observations may lead to a compromise on the quality. Very high quality of research may compromise on a very small quantity of research. If I want very highly reliable observations, I have to be so careful that I may not be able to get many observations. So there is also a conflict between quality and quantity. And therefore, as a researcher, we may have to be careful about how to balance between the quality and the quantity. If we go to one extreme, we may get very large data very of a low quality. On the other hand, we may get very high quality data but of very small magnitude. What is the problem with high quality data with small magnitude? Generalization is difficult. What is the problem with high quantity data but low quality? Unreliable. So the conclusions of this research may not be generalizable, may not be applicable to the society. So we have to balance between the quality and the quantity. And this is how we have to balance between the easy but not so reliable with the difficult but not so much. So quality and quantity both are to be balanced. So even if there are three ways, again it becomes a research problem. So as a result, the short and quick method is more subjective or less objective, therefore not very desirable. On the other hand, the most trustable method is time taking and involves a lot of work in the form of collecting responses of several students. So even if I get very reliable results, it may have taken so much of time that even if I find some problems, I may not have time to correct them. And therefore, I don't want to spend too much of time. But on the other hand, I don't want too quick an answer, which is not very reliable. So every time we can see that the best solution is not at one of the two ends. So we can think of a scale. The low end of the scale is high quality, very small quantity. The other end of the scale we can say is high quantity, very small, very low quality. The optimal is somewhere between them. The two extremes, none of the two extremes is an optimal solution. And therefore, the mathematical methods of optimality will not work here. This is a conceptual or logical optimality. So, therefore, it is necessary to compare different available options before using any one of them. So, before we decide to use one of the methods, we should compare different options. So, one of the basic activities in any research, philosophical activities in research, is first to identify what are the different possible ways, find the alternatives, find the pros and cons as they are called of these approaches. Pros means favorable, what is in favor, and con means what is opposing. So as we say, merits and demerits, what makes a particular step good and what makes it not so good or bad. So positive approaches or positive points and negative points. So for every possible approach, I will have to make a list. What is good about this, what is not so good, or what is bad about this. As we saw, that if you have a very large sample, then it may take so much of time, and in order to say get information on such a large sample, I may not be able to maintain the quality of my observations, quality of the data. So very often there is always a conflict between quality and quantity. Large quantity may not be able to guarantee high quality. On the other hand, if I want to maintain high quality, the quantity may not be very high. So there is always a clash between quality and quantity. So where to compromise is the decision that the researcher has to make. So one of the non-quantitative, non-mathematical, non-numerical approach to deciding how many observations to make, how to make observations, how to record the data, and so on before analysis. All these questions are to be answered, because when we finalize our data, then only we begin the analysis. So all these are philosophical questions because they end before the analysis. Usually in during the analysis, the questions are not philosophical, then they become methodological. But before we even collect data, there can be some philosophical questions. After we collect the data, before we begin analysis, there can be some philosophical questions. So typically, when we think of the philosophical problems or background of research, it is typically, sometimes we call it logical problems, sometimes we call them quality problems, and so on. So there are different ways in which we should consider our say proposed or potential research activities in light of these approaches, these questions. So now we already found the word epistemology. So there is another word, ontology. Epistemology is the nature of knowledge. That is, how do we acquire knowledge, in what form? So the nature, how do I understand? How do I learn? And second is the nature of reality, ontology. That is, reality may be there, but what is the nature? In what form does the reality present itself? In what form does something happen? So nature of reality. And then why do we need all of these? Because we have to develop knowledge. The objective of any research, without going to too many details, the common objective is obviously to develop or generate knowledge. And once we understand this concept of developing or generating knowledge, then obviously the question is, what are possible ways of developing knowledge? Because there are different steps in developing knowledge. So knowledge cannot be developed in one step. We cannot say, okay, now I have this question, answer this question, and now I have got knowledge. So we have to go step by step. So what are the steps of acquiring or developing knowledge? So first step is to get an idea. Okay, idea can be abstract, idea can be not very strong, a proposal. So begin with an idea. After an idea, if we start thinking about this idea, after a certain amount of time, after discussing it again and again, after understanding, trying to analyze and so on, after thinking over the idea, I develop a belief. Now, belief obviously is personal. My personal belief, somebody else's personal belief. So, what can happen? One idea can generate different beliefs in different people. So, idea is common, but belief is personal. Okay, after I process, after I develop a belief, I work on it again and again, and then I come to a true belief. What is the claim? The claim is the true belief is not subjective. My claim is okay. For you, something is the reality. For me, something is the reality. What is common? So we believe that something is common. That is a true belief. So belief is personal, but true belief is considered to be again a common ground. So we try to remove the personal biases and try to arrive at a common belief system, and we call it the true belief. Then we still go further, try to find out some experience, try to find out some evidences, and then we say, okay, is this true belief justified? Because there can be some two or three points which are considered to be parts of the true belief, but some of these may be justified. So we have one step further is justified true belief. That is not only we have something in common, so that that belief is common between us, that is the true belief, not personal, but it is also now justified. So we are now going more stronger in establishing something. Then knowledge claim. So what is the advantage, or what is to be done with a justified true belief? So once I have justified true belief, that is I have certain true belief, that is I have certain common belief among people, I have also found a justification for it. So what do I claim from that? Then I claim that I have acquired some knowledge. So after getting the justified true belief, I have come to the stage of knowledge claim, not established, knowledge claim. So after I claim this knowledge, I process the data further, I process the information further, I may ask some more questions, I may carry out some activities, and then I confirm my knowledge. So arrive at some knowledge after going through these stages. So I begin with an idea, then develop it to the level of the belief, then take it to the level of the true belief, then take it to the level of the justified true belief. Then I propose a claim about some knowledge, and when I confirm it, I say now I have acquired the knowledge. So these are the steps of developing knowledge. So knowledge is not some object that we can acquire. Knowledge is something that we have to develop, because we can understand something step by step, so that improving the understanding is developing the knowledge. If knowledge was some entity like an object, I could have just picked it up, then I would have said acquire the knowledge. So what we acquire is information, and what we develop is knowledge, because in some sense the complete knowledge cannot be expressed. Try to think of some say some understanding that you think is knowledge, your knowledge, and try to explicitly express it. And what you will find is you can express results. You can express results, but you cannot express the knowledge. For example, in mathematics we say that there is some abstract mathematics, there is some concrete mathematics. Arithmetic is a concrete mathematics. Addition is an operation. So how do we define addition operation? By examples. We say, okay, take a number take a number n, add the two numbers. So in the beginning, at the very primary school level, how did we define addition? We began with integers. We said, okay, if I want 4 plus 3, I'll take 4 on this side, I will take 3 on this side and count them together. So before we could add the numbers, we actually considered addition as counting one after the other. And when I reach the number 7, I say, oh, 4 plus 3 is equal to 7. So then what we did, we said, okay, every time I don't want to count, I will memorize this operation. So for me, addition is a shortcut of counting. Then we learned multiplication. 5 students have say 4 coins each. So how many coins are there in total? So one way that we learned earlier is add 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. So I want to add the number 4 5 times. Again, I say, oh, this operation is too much. So what can I do? Multiplication. So I write 4, I multiply it by 5, I get the answer. So in some sense, what am I trying to do? Too many additions, I am now simplifying by multiplication. Too many counts, I was simplifying as addition. So if we think of even simple mathematical operations, what we try to do is simplify. And what do we call this simplification? We say our knowledge of mathematics is improving. Why is it called a knowledge? Because it is universal. Knowledge does not have limitations. Once I understand mathematical operations of multiplication, there is no limitation. So knowledge is unlimited, information is limited, because information may be only in a certain situation. So objective of research is usually to acquire new knowledge, because information has to be observed or can be observed, but knowledge has to be acquired. Why? Because knowledge is abstract, information can be concrete. So this is one way in which we think of the philosophical foundations of research. Why should I carry out research? So obviously to develop or acquire more knowledge. In what form do I acquire knowledge? So knowledge usually is abstract. It can be expressed, but I cannot count my knowledge. I can count the amount of information. There is something known as information theory, where there are measures of information, there are different formulae, there are different methods for measuring information. But so far, there is no method or there is no measure of knowledge. Either I know it or I do not know it. I may partially know it, I may completely be ignorant, no knowledge, and so on. So knowledge is more qualitative, information can be quantified. And therefore there is a information theory. Why is the information theory there? What does it do? It quantifies the amount of information, and therefore information being quantifiable can be measured, and therefore there is a theory. For knowledge, it is considered as part of philosophical discussion, because we cannot measure knowledge. We can only have indicators of knowledge. We can only have indicators or comparisons between someone who knows better and someone who does not so much. So there can be comparisons, but not numerical. We cannot say I know twice what you know. Somebody else knows only 10% of what I know. So there is no quantitative comparison for knowledge. There is no quantitative measurements for knowledge. And therefore, it's a very logical, philosophical, or even conceptual idea to, to think of acquiring knowledge as the purpose of research. Why do I carry out research? Is because I want to either develop knowledge or acquire knowledge. How do I develop knowledge? By analysis. How do I acquire knowledge? By observation. So I want to collect observations, I want to collect data so that I can acquire some knowledge. But what I get from the data is information. Then I have to further process the information to acquire the knowledge. For example, I go to a bank. I want to withdraw some money. So I go there is a queue. So I wait in the queue. So after one after the other, the customers are getting service. Then I come to the counter. I have already filled my withdrawal slip. So I submit it to the cashier. I may show my ID proof to the cashier or my passbook to the cashier. The cashier counts the currency, gives me the money. I also count. I am satisfied. Got my service. I came out. So what I have done, I can measure how much time did I spend in the queue. First waiting time is before I came to the counter. So before my service began, the time that I spent in waiting is my waiting time. Then I can also measure how much time did I spend at the counter. Now obviously the time spent at the counter will depend on my activity. If I want only 500 rupees, the cashier will take a one note of 500 rupees, hand it over to me. Within a second, I am out. If I want 15,000 rupees, then the cashier will have to count 30 notes of 500 rupees and so on. So depending on my activity, the time required may be not a constant. But these are all observations. After having experienced what I say, do I acquire some knowledge? I acquire the knowledge that if I go to the bank before a certain time, the queue is not very long and it does not take much time for me to get the service. If I go to the bank during a certain time period, there may be long queues and it takes more time for me to get the service. Now, these two conclusions are non quantitative. I only say that during certain time, I don't have to spend much time in waiting. During a certain period of time, I have to spend more time for getting the service while waiting. So these are qualitative approaches. And therefore, what we saw, this is my knowledge because knowledge is more qualitative and observations are usually quantitative. So acquiring knowledge is one of the basic purposes of carrying out research. And therefore, if I want to acquire knowledge, then there are some norms, there are some ethical issues, there are some say moralities and so on. So why do I want to understand all these procedures? Because I want to know which of these procedures or forms involve some problems, potential problems. Where should I be careful? Where should I not be careful? For example, empirical research. So empirical research means we try to collect observations or try to collect data that is already there. Socio-economic survey, for example. So when I want to carry out a socio-economic survey, I prepare a questionnaire and I go to some selected households and I ask them questions and try to complete this questionnaire. Now, what does it mean? When I go to a house, the person may say, I have the right to privacy. So why should I disclose my information to you? So in order to respond to this question, what I have done, I have already given a declaration of confidentiality, non-disclosure agreement as they call it. That is what I assure this respondent is the identity of this respondent will not be disclosed to anybody. Non-disclosure statement. So I give a form, I give an undertaking that the information that we gather from you will be used only for this research and will not be disclosed to anybody. So non-disclosure agreement, then the person is willing to respond to me. When I get the responses, very often when if I want to have to give it to some say data analyst for analysis, then what I have to do, I have to remove the initial part where the person's name may be there. So identifiable information may be removed because that is not part of my analysis. My analysis is about relationships between different variables that I observe, different questions, answers to different questions. So what I do, keep the confidentiality. So these are the ethical issues. I want to conduct a survey on effectiveness of a medicine. So I invite volunteers. So certain number of volunteers, some of these people come to me. They say, okay, we are prepared for the experiment. So what to do? So I say, okay, I want to test a new medicine. So what I do, randomly I select some people to get the medicine and I give a supposedly non-medicine, but some the participants, the recipients don't know whether I am giving them medicine or not. All of them get something, some dose, For me, I know that some people have got the medicine, some people have not got the medicine. It is known as a placebo. Now, in the beginning of such experiments, the idea of placebo was not there. Only some people were selected, they were given the medicine, and the other people were only observed. Why? Because the idea was, after the end of the experiment, I compare the group which received the medicine, I call it experimental group, and the group which did not receive the medicine, I call it control group. And then I said, okay, after the treatment, after the certain period of treatment, now I want to compare the experimental group with the control group. It went on for some time. Then somebody came and claimed that because the experimental group knows that they are getting a treatment, there can be some healing due to belief. Because they trust that the medicine will cure them, that feeling may help in the curing. So, how do you distinguish between the cure, part of curing that has happened due to the medicine, and part of curing that has happened due to belief? We have no way of distinguishing between the two. So what to do? Then someone came and said, okay, what you do, you have a medicine. You make another substance which looks like medicine but is not medicine. It is very harmless, simple material. So everybody feels that he or she is getting the medicine. Only the experimenter knows who is getting medicine, who is not getting the medicine. So we call that non-medicine material as placebo. So what have I done? I have removed the component of the belief curing, the part of curing which happened due to the belief that I will be cured because I am getting the medicine. So that psychological component is removed. And now what happens? The difference between the two groups is purely due to medication. So now these are the ethical aspects. Nowadays, what happens? Even further, the things have gone further. And what is done? Even the volunteer, or if the even the experimenter who is conducting the experiment does not know who is getting the medicine and who is getting the placebo. We call it the double blinding. Neither the receiver nor the experimenter knows who is getting the medicine and who is getting the placebo. Why? Because when experimenter knew who is getting medicine and who is not getting the medicine and getting only placebo, people felt that the expressions of the experimenter revealed to a sensitive patient whether the patient was really getting the medicine or was not getting the medicine. So how do I suppress that, even that information that can be conveyed very minutely, even the experimenter does not know. This is called double blinding. So all these aspects came up due to philosophical aspects of experimental research. And therefore, when we want to think of research, it is not only a methodology, it is not only a logic, but there is also a philosophy. What do we mean by philosophy? Philosophy is the logic of mind. When I am convinced of something, then I will be honest. Honesty is not, cannot be or is not experimental entity. Sometimes even the honesty cannot be observed. Even sometimes honesty is difficult to define. So honesty is a property that we have to ensure on our own. So honesty is a philosophical property aspect. So we have to think of different philosophical approaches or philosophical aspects. Now there are certain ways in which approaches to research also can be considered philosophically. So for example, there are pairs of contrasts. Say for example, deductive versus inductive. What is deductive? We have a universal rule, and then we say, okay, because this is the rule, this will happen in this case. So from the universal to the particular is deductive. What is inductive? We observe something and then say, oh, this must be happening to all. So from a few to the to all is inductive. So before I carry out research, before I get into research, I have to decide what is the nature of my research. Is it deductive or is it inductive? Most of the research in mathematics is deductive. Most of the research in natural sciences is inductive, because what you can observe is very few observations, but your conclusion is about the nature. So we have to decide whether we are going to carry out deductive research versus inductive research. Why? Again, we have to justify. When I want to generalize from my observations, I have to justify how am I going to generalize, what are the conditions, are there any restrictions, are there any provisos, and so on. I will give a simple example. All of us know reasonable mathematics, not very deep mathematics. Suppose I claim that I want to first define prime numbers and then give a rule about prime numbers. So how do we define a prime number? A prime number that does not have any factors excepting itself and 1. 7 has no factors excepting 7 and 1. 9 has two factors. 3 multiplied by 3 is 9. 11 and 13 are prime numbers. 15 can be expressed as 3 into 5, 15, and so on. Now, if I want to make a rule about prime numbers, somebody says, okay, he observes some numbers and says, okay, all odd numbers are prime. Now, we have to be, if I read this statement, I have to first decide whether I would like to prove this or disprove this. Why? If I want to prove these, then I have to take odd numbers and show that they are prime. If I want to disprove these, I can even show one odd number which is not a prime, and the story is over. Therefore, depending on what is my claim, my work is decided. So, there are many aspects in which we have to be careful about deciding what to do, how to do, and how much to do. Then there is also a pair, positivism versus constructivism. Constructivism is reality is constructed through the mind of the researcher, observer, and it is also known as relativism. That is, there is no absolute truth. What I observe is truth for me. What you observe is truth for you. So it is my. So sometimes the researcher said or philosopher said that in my mind I think that something is happening. So I am constructing my own reality. Therefore, it is known as constructivism, as opposed to positivism. That is, there is something which is positively there, so reality is external. There is no relationship between me and what I believe. So the knower and the knowledge are not related to each other. In the constructivism, the knowledge is a construction of the knower, and therefore there is a relative relationship. So something may be reality for me, but that may not be reality for you. So this is a constructivist approach. But when the what I know does not depend on who I am, then we call it positivism. Einstein at one stage has said that what is about relativity. He said that there are two ways in which we can observe a system. What are the two ways? One is become part of the system and observe it from inside. The second is come out of the system, don't be a part of the system and observe the system. And what he said is when we observe the system from within the system, if we are part of the system, our observation is affected by our own position. So we are not in a position to know exactly how the system works. But if we want to know exactly how the system works, we should be outside the system. This is a philosophical aspect. If I want to know whether, say, certain educational or in a certain classroom, if the students are learning properly or not, I should not become part of them. I should be able to observe it. So sometimes this situation is known as a third person observation. Teacher is the first person, students are the second person. Then we need a third person who is neither a teacher nor a student to observe whether the teaching learning process is proper. So why philosophical approaches are required is because we need a third person approach to understand whether the developer and the receiver, the supporter, supplier, and the receiver are working in a proper way. So researchers require a philosophical aspect. Then there are, as I said, ethical considerations. That is, certain activities are may not be ethically appropriate. Sometimes we may have to take consents. Sometimes we have to take permissions of parents if we are experimenting with children, and so on. So there are many approaches. Consents of participants have to be taken before we ask them certain questions. Non-disclosure agreement may have to be signed. So there are various ways in which we should be able to carefully plan our research. And once we take all these precautions, then our research will be more valid, more acceptable, and publishable. Because if I don't have the required documents, and if I send my research paper to some journal, they may ask for these documents, and they may say, okay, unless you have these documents accepted by the participants, your research is not publishable. May not be valid, may be valid, but not publishable or not acceptable, and so on. So we also require certain philosophical aspects for even validity of our research and acceptability of the research. So I think I'll stop with this. Thank you. And if there are some questions, we may get to that question answer session later. But currently, you will be learning many things during this course. So my approach was to talk about the philosophical aspects of research, because very often people feel research is only activity oriented. There is no logic, there is no philosophy. We don't have to worry too much about uh, uh, whether the research that I am carrying out is good or bad, ethical or not, and so on. So there may be only a, or many people take a so-called materialistic view of research. But we have to understand that there is also a philosophical background and a philosophical approach to research. So with this, I conclude.